My name is Chantel, and
I'm Ravina.
And before we start baking our cake, we're going to introduce sort of the history and the background information of Jarvis's learning theory. So Jarvis's learning process puts emphasis on life experience, which is what makes adult education different than children's because of their rich and fruitful life experiences. Life experience provides new avenues of exploration, application, and learning.
Integration is key for this process because a person's experience is rooted from the different social groups and communities that they belong to, contributing to a changed or more experienced person. However, this change may be positive or negative depending on how the individual perceives their learning environment. But the main premise here for Jarvis's theory is that the more experience a person has, the better able they are to cope with future life situations and problems. So now we're going to go in and talk about the history and origins of Jarvis's theory.
Exactly. So Jarvis's theory stemmed from Kolb's theory of experimental theory, which illustrated a four-stage learning cycle and four separate learning styles. As Kolb famously said, learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience.
Kolb outlined four learning stages: the concrete experience, which was when a new experience was encountered, or the reinterpretation of an existing experience, reflective observation of the new experience, seeing if there was any inconsistencies between the experience and the person's understanding of the experience, abstract conceptualization, the reflection that happened in the prior stage would give rise to a new idea, modifying a person's existing ideas, and active experimentation, wherein the learner applies them to the world around them and see what results.
And we can see how Jarvis's theory stemmed from Kolb's theory in that both theories emphasize the power of experience. Jarvis built upon Kolb's idea to further introduce new notions of stages of learning. Jarvis included three stages of learning: non-learning, non-reflective, and reflective.
The non-learning stage consists of an individual being presumptuous, non-considering of the experience, and ultimately rejects the experience. Thus, no learning takes place. The non-reflective stage outlines some learning taking place, but learning is mostly on a pre-conscious, superficial level, but is memorized in practice. It's on the way to being integrated. The reflective stage, the most powerful stage, constitutes the learner actively reflecting on their new experiences, resulting in contemplation, reflection, and thus experimentation or learning. So as we can see here, Jarvis's added on to Kolb's theory in providing stages that don't necessarily have to act in a linear fashion, taking in consideration an individual's motivation to learn. And we will be exemplifying or portraying these stages in our baking segment.
Yeah, so let's go do it.
Sweet.
Welcome to Baking with Chantel and Ravina. I'm your host, Chantel, and we will be showing you how to apply Jarvis's theory of adult learning to baking a delicious cake.
Yeah, and I'm Ravina, and we're so excited to get started. So what we're going to be doing today is baking a yummy, rich chocolate cake and applying that to Jarvis's theory of adult learning. This recipe is perfect for showing how baking a cake and how the recipe format can apply to Jarvis's theory.
Alright then, so an important concept for Jarvis's theory is life experience. And this is what makes adults differ from, say, elementary school or high school kids, because adults have more life experience. So we're backed up by the experience we have gone through. Jarvis's theory really takes the importance of life experience into consideration when talking about learning. So let's start off with the ingredients we will be using. Here we have our flour, sugar, cocoa, baking powder, baking soda, salt, milk, vinegar, oil, vanilla, and hot coffee brewing.
So now let's prepare our flour mixture by mixing the flour, sugar, and cocoa. Okay, so now we have the flour. So those of you who are interested in making this cake at home, it's 1 3/4 cups of flour. Let's put that in the bowl. And then we have 2 cups of sugar and 3/4 of a cup of cocoa powder.
Looks delicious so far.
And then we mix all that up until it becomes one big mass of your background. So these ingredients can be seen as giving a person the core structure of who they are. These ingredients are super duper important in holding the cake together, and then can be seen as a metaphor for the core background or core composition of a human being that puts them together. Without a solid base, an individual is nothing without considering their background, where they came from, what cultures and subcultures they belong to, and so on. This in itself is reminiscent of life experience and the main emphasis of Jarvis's theory.
Awesome, cool. An important thing to note with these bases or backgrounds ingredients is that they are substantial. This could further be applied to Jarvis's theory in the sense that as an adult learner, you accumulate a substantial amount of life experience through the means of your background and life history. So, because the flour, sugar, and cocoa have the greatest quantities in the recipe, it would be applicable to say that these ingredients are the most substantial. Which could further be applied to Jarvis's theory in that one's background is truly a substantial feature in one's life experience.
So, yeah, that was a really good point, Chantel. So we've mixed together all the flour, sugar, and cocoa, and it's all come together as one large mixture. It's all integrated as one. And integration is another key factor of Jarvis's theory. Jarvis notes that life experience is only beneficial in the learning process if one integrates their life experience in how they explore, apply, and learn new information, and therefore have new experiences. So throughout the whole recipe, we're going to constantly stress how important integration is in regard to this theory of adult learning, as we will also model the different levels of integration that Jarvis has outlined in his theory. We will be using the eggs as a metaphor for a human being. The eggs are the entities that we will be applying the processes of Jarvis's learning model to.
Well, that was really interesting, Ravina. All right, let's get on to the recipe then.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to take our eggs and we're going to put them in the flour mixture. As we mentioned before, the eggs serve as a metaphor for the human being. So I'm just going to crack them. So that's one egg, and that's two eggs. Sweet. So this can be seen as relating to Jarvis's non-learning phase of his learning model. Jarvis describes this stage as simply that, non-learning, in which an individual is presumptuous, non-considering of the experience, and ultimately rejects the experience, thus inhibiting themselves from learning from the experience and applying what they learned to future situations in learning. Here in our recipe example, we can kind of see how this is being described. The eggs are just sitting on top, as Chantel mentioned before, they're just sitting on top of the flour mixture with no integration. This means for no integration, maybe because the eggs are not considering their background, the flour mixture, as being something that they can learn from, and thus they are rejecting, whether implicitly or explicitly, the value of knowledge they could carry forward with this life experience.
Wow, that really goes to show the power of integration. Now, let's see what happens when we mix the mixture of eggs together. All right, let's go to it. Seems like they're being difficult integrating into the flour. See, now we have the beginnings of a more incorporated batter, and now we can see the beginnings of a more integrated person. Also, you will notice that with more mixing, more time, more ingredients, more experience, we will have a smoother, more integrated batter. So this could be applied again to Jarvis's theory in that the more time that passes, the more integrated a person becomes, and the more life experience that could be integrated and ingrained into the individual.
That's a really good point, Chantal. So now on to the next ingredients. They're baking soda, baking powder, and salt, and it's 1.5 teaspoons baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons baking soda, and half of a teaspoon of salt. So now we're just going to put that into the bowl. All of these components can be seen as rising agents. So in the context of Jarvis's theory, let's think of these as challenging and growing experiences. They are ingredients of the least quantities in the recipe, but they are critical, and without them, no process would happen, and we would end up with a failed cake. This could be applied to the human condition as well. We all need those experiences that teach us to challenge ourselves and enable us to grow as individuals.
In the context of Jarvis's theory, then, we could argue that the growing enabling experiences are the ones that leave the greatest impact on us. As you saw, these ingredients were easily integrated into the batter now, which can tell us that although these components are critical, they stand out. And we often find that it is these situations, the ones that help us challenge ourselves and grow, that stick in our minds and resonate with us on a deeper level than, say, our background information and our awareness, our life experiences pertaining to our background and our history.
So now we're just going to put all of our liquid ingredients to a bowl and mix them up. So now we're going to take 1 cup of whole milk. Let's measure that out. And we're going to add 1 tablespoon of vinegar to the milk. It's half a tablespoon, and that's a tablespoon. So now we're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes, and then that will make our milk good for our recipe. Okay, so now we've waited for our milk to set up, and now we're going to add in our vanilla and our vegetable oil. So you just want 1 teaspoon of vanilla in there, not too much. Actually, you can put as much as you want. It just adds that little extra oomph in your cake. And then the oil. So you want half a cup of oil. Okay. That's half a cup. Now we're gonna mix it into our liquids. Okay, so here are our liquids, and you can kind of see here that the oil is kind of sitting on top. This is kind of like how the eggs were on the flour mixture when we first put them in. It wasn't really incorporated into the rest of it, and how we can see the oil sitting on top of it. That's kind of like the non-learning stage as well. But look what happens when we start mixing it up. It's kind of getting there. It's kind of, you know, like it's starting to get incorporated. It may not be fully incorporated. So this is kind of reminiscent of the second stage, which is the non-reflective stage, which Jarvis says some learning can occur, the experience is taking place, and it's on the process of integration. So here we can see it's in the process of getting fully incorporated into the other ingredients. Okay, so now it's time for our dry batter to have some liquid in it. It's kind of looking a little bit dry. So now we're just gonna put that in here. Get that all in there. And again, we can see, same with the eggs, same with the oil, that the liquids are just sitting on top of the dry. And now, once we start mixing, requires a little bit of work, the liquids are getting incorporated into the batter. And this can be, again, like we said before, like the non-reflexive stage, that the batter is slowly, with more mixing, with more time, getting integrated into the rest of the batter. Yeah, so now once we have kind of this smoother batter coming along, this can be applied to Jarvis's theory in that his final stage, which is called the reflective stage, where integration is happening, where the experience is fully ingrained, fully integrated into the individual, and they can learn from it.
What an interesting metaphor.
Awesome. So now comes the all-encompassing part, the boiling coffee. In this recipe, the coffee is used to integrate all the other ingredients in a way that leaves the batter kind of runny. But when you bake it, the flavor it provides is one of a kind. So let's go ahead and mix that in, Chantel. There you go. And then we're just gonna slowly just mix that in.
In application to Jarvis's theory, the coffee serves as a very important metaphor. One of Jarvis's main tenets is that with all the accumulation of life experience, one is able to adapt to and explore future situations, experiences, and problems more readily. The more experience a person has, the better they're able to cope with life situations and problems, and thus better able to learn. So we can see that the batter is really runny. Let's watch what happens when we put the batter in a pan. It's like grade 9 science all over again. A liquid is a plastic in a sense that it can adapt to whatever condition it is put in. So the batter is able to form to whatever it needs to without compromising its state. In the framework of Jarvis's theory, then, life experience enables you to be plastic, enables you to be able to adapt to a variety of situations without hindering your own being, your values, your structure, your core. Your life experience is what makes you able to deal with a variety of situations easily and more readily. And this, folks, is the main takeaway from Jarvis's model.
Cut. Alright, now the batter's all done, so we can go ahead and bake this. For those of you that are baking with us at home, make sure you preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to bake from 30 to 40 minutes. Yeah, so let's put this in.
Happy baking! I can't wait to see the result.
So now, as you can see, our cake is done baking, and we went ahead and separated the layers. So we have 3 layers of cake and 2 layers of frosting. So we're just going to put a layer of frosting in the middle.
Our creative artifact.
Alright, so now there we have it. We have our masterpiece at the end of this. So this just goes to show that throughout all of that, throughout all of those processes, and you end up with a beautiful result, this just further applies to Jarvis's theory that if you do a successful job in integrating those life experiences into your learning, then you end up with something magnificent and all-encompassing.
Stay tuned for our interviews with our adult education expert. Hi, and welcome back to Cooking with Ravina and Chantal. As I mentioned before, my name is Chantal, and I am the host, and I'm joined here today with a student all the way from UBC. This is Melody, and she is an adult and higher education expert. Welcome.
Thank you, Chantal. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, as you know, before we were just cooking a cake and applying Jarvis's theory metaphorically to the different stages of baking that cake. And as you are an adult and higher education expert, I was wondering if you could answer a couple of questions.
Sure, of course.
Awesome. So let's just start it. An audience actually asked, do you potentially see any flaws in Jarvis's model?
Yes, definitely. Every theory has its pros and cons. Nobody's perfect. Actually, in an article by Avery Reed, they critic Jarvis' learning model, saying that it does not reflect either its supporting text or sound modeling practices and conventions, is subject to an error in discourse, and fails to depict the specific learning route that Jarvis' own research identified. The author then discussed how Jarvis criticized definition of learning that proposed that new cognitive knowledge has only been acquired when it results in behavioral change. It is important to note that Jarvis says that there is a potential for a change, a potential that arises precisely because of the acquisition of new learning. He then contradicts himself by outlining that a learner who has acquired precocious learning or skills as an unchanged person, but a person who does not translate precocious learning into overt behavior is no more to be equated with an unchanged person than a person who does not change behavior even though there has been a cognitive learning. In other words, knowledge has been acquired but is not being made because of it. Using Jarvis' very own argument, precocious learning of whatever variety, knowledge, skills, attitudes, beliefs, values, or emotions And then senses opens up opportunity for persons to engage or not in new behavior. That is to say, when a person has learned, a person has changed. Whether behavior has changed in another matter, but even people with no memories for daily life can learn.
Wow, how interesting. You are quite the expert.
Thank you.
Thanks for telling us. And we have another question from the audience. And they asked, how do you think Jarvis's learning theory can apply to our current academic system?
In Jarvis' paper, he always mentioned the necessity of investing in the research of learning, both adult and adolescent. This is because the more we understand about the process of learning, the more successful we could apply the theories into our academic system. Right now, there isn't a lot of research being done on how the different social context backgrounds affect the learning process. And since Canadians are a multicultural place, I think our academic system could explore a little more into giving students different methods of learning and positively giving it more option into the grading system. Therefore, we are giving students more options to use the academic system and also enhances the learning process.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that insight.